Welcome to this event. I'm delighted to be here. This has been many months of really lovely work. And so I wanted to just start off by introducing my collaborators. Kate Black. Where's Kate? Oh, there we go. So Kate from Magnifico and Eco Sessions, Daphna Lewinstein and Nicole Bohrer. They're research fellows in the DEED Research Lab. Thank you so much to the Alliance for Artisan Enterprise for your support. Peggy Clark, who's here and will be speaking in a moment, and Natalie Deutschley as well. And I'm Cynthia Lawson. I'm Associate Professor of Integrated Design at Parsons, and I'm also the Director of the DEED Research Lab. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about DEED, the kind of work that we do, and why we decided to work on this study and on this survey. So DEED started in 2007. We started as a collaboration with the large humanitarian organization called CARE, and our goal was to try to help a group of indigenous Mayan women in the highlands of Guatemala bring their products to New York Fashion Week. This was the goal of our donor at the time. It was the goal of the artisans who expressed interest in also being able to take advantage of CAFTA, so the Central American Free Trade Agreement. And so that kicked off that project and collaboration that is still ongoing. Their products have not yet been shown in New York Fashion Week, and once we arrived there, we realized that was really a very long-term aspirational goal. And so we, as a research lab, have been really excited to think about how to model more sustainable ways for designers to work with artisans, and really think of our mission in three ways. The first one is certainly thinking about how we can support artisans as a university through the work of our students. How can we support them in generating additional income through craft? That could be the development of products. It could also be by teaching their craft, which is one of the things that we have modeled. We're also really interested in how the university can extend its campus to outside of the classroom. It's something I'm very interested in as a faculty member. What are those things that our students could never really learn in a classroom here in New York City that they could being immersed in new global cultural contexts, very different from where they grew up, very different from where we are in the heart of the village in New York City. And so that's really one of the beautiful things. And Daphna, who's here, is a DEED alumna and participated in our fieldwork program in Colombia in 2012, and she could share her experiences if you were interested. And then finally, it's really thinking about how do we engage with our students on campus to then have them lead out the collaborations with the artisans. And so the model that we've been developing over the years is that our students are quote unquote trained on campus for this project, but also in their own areas of expertise, from design to management to development, to then run workshops for the artisans. And this is an image of students running a workshop on time valuation, which is a critical conversation to have when you're talking about product pricing with artisans. And I think now as a research lab, really thanks to the work that we've been doing with the Alliance for Artisan Enterprise, we can really now add this new mission to our core, which is really thinking about how a research lab within a university can play an interesting role within the artisan sector. And the Faircraft study and survey is the first of, I hope, many projects. The image that you see there is from a workshop I led at the Alliance's retreat in Santa Fe last summer. And that was my first engagement to work with companies and work with the sector in trying to really challenge the enterprises with difficult questions, with really trying to model these fairer, more sustainable ways to go about the work that we're all interested in doing. So why Faircraft? This really was thanks to an evening hosted by the Alliance at Mayette, where I met Kate. And I was looking back in my inbox, and exactly a year ago from tomorrow is when Kate followed up to say, "Lovely to meet you. let's really talk about that event that we talked about doing. And so it's great that a year later we're here with this study. And Faircraft for us, it's been really wonderful, and I really cannot express my gratitude to all of you here who participated in the survey, that you really opened up your enterprises for us to gather data, to be able to reflect back to you all. Today we'll be showing just the very beginning of our findings. It has really prompted us to want to do additional surveys and ask additional questions, and we hope that we'll continue to have that access and really collaborate on that together. And so Faircraft is just this idea, this concept that we came up with. It's a question, what is Faircraft? It's a question that we could all collaborate on, that hopefully we'll start to answer today, but we'll certainly continue for much longer. The way we've designed the day, we're going to hear from the Deed Research Fellows, who will give us those beginning findings, both from the surveys and from the one-on-one interviews that Daphna conducted. So we were able to connect with more than 120 enterprises, and that really gives us a really nice pool of data to work with. Then we're going to hear from two presentations, Tara St. James and Despina Papdopoulos, who are doing really interesting work and more the projects that really connect with this question of fairness and wages and labor in the artisan sector. We'll have a break, since one of the great values of eco-sessions that Kate runs is really this community that we're building together. So hoping that you all can further connect with one another, and we have some refreshments. We'll have a panel discussion moderated by Kate with some of the speakers. And then finally we'll hear from Peggy Clark from the Alliance. And then we'll end again with more time for us to meet and gather. So welcome again. Glad for you that you're here. And I'll just hand it over to Nicole Borer and Daphna Lewenstein.
So thank you, Cynthia, for the introduction. Thank you for all of you for coming today. We are very happy to present these findings from our Faircraft survey, which many of you so generously spent time completing. So thank you so much again. So as Cynthia mentioned, we received 103 responses to our survey and held 18 interviews. Our two main conclusions were that there is no consistent practice for deciding wages, and that most businesses which we surveyed are paying per piece rather than an hourly wage. The 103 respondents to the survey represents artisans in 37 countries throughout the Americas, Asia, Africa, and Europe. The products made by these artisans can be classified as homewares, fashion, beauty products, or accessories, which was the most popular category in our survey. A small number of respondents also mentioned toys and children's products, jewelry, ornaments, and textiles.
So respondents to the survey were roughly equally distributed when it came to the number of artisans with whom they work. Nevertheless, almost a quarter of the organizations say they work with 100 to 500 artisans, and 8% indicated that they work with anywhere from 700 to 4,000 artisans. We found, however, that many respondents and interviewees seemed unsure of the exact number of artisans they actually work with. And the trend is that the enterprises contract work out to the cooperatives or other types of groups, who then subcontract work to the artisans themselves. For example, only 2 respondents specifically mentioned that their artisans were employees of their enterprise, and on the other hand, 2 respondents specifically referred to their artisan partners as independent artisans or contractors. Also notable to us is that the number of artisans employed by the enterprises seems to correlate negatively with the number of employees in the organization. For example, almost 75% of respondents have less than 10 employees working for them, and that's including the respondents that count the most number of artisans that they work with. So this feedback suggests that the majority of respondents to our survey represent micro enterprises, whether they be a nonprofit, an NGO, a social enterprise with profitable ends, or a for-profit business. This serves to confirm our hypothesis that enterprises are contracting production out to their artisan partners, who often sell their products collectively through cooperatives and who are often located in a country different than that of the enterprise. So this may sound really obvious to you, especially everyone in the audience who works with cooperatives maybe, but less obvious is how this affects artisan wages. And in fact, we believe that this could explain why our survey respondents and interviewees could not speak to how much each artisan was actually being paid.
Okay. So here's an example of a supply chain for bed sheets made in India for a buyer in the United States. It starts off in a cooperative in the state of Karnataka, where the silk is grown and spun into thread. Sorry. Then the thread is sent to a second enterprise in Varanasi, where it is woven into fabric on a hand loom. The fabric then travels to a third destination, an embroidery co-op in East Delhi, to be hand embroidered. It then goes to a fourth enterprise in South Delhi, where it is cut and sewn. Sorry. The buyer deals directly with the fourth enterprise and pays fair trade prices. The buyer knows that the South Delhi factory pays its workers a fair wage. They also know that the embroidery is done at a fair trade pricing. But with so many independent groups in the supply chain, there's really no one person who knows what each artisan involved in the making of the bed sheets has been paid.
So the information we received regarding how much artisans are paid was really too variable to be able to report. And in fact, we were surprised to hear that some enterprises had very little idea about the exact amount that artisans were being paid. But what was very clear is that an overwhelming majority of artisans are paid per piece for their work. Only 14% of artisans are paid an hourly wage, and the remaining 13% are divided up between a daily wage, a monthly wage, and a combination of an hourly wage and a piece rate. And some respondents were even uncertain about artisans' wage rates because they do not buy products directly from the producers, as Despina just explained to us. And while there are clear advantages to receiving an hourly, daily, or monthly rate, wage rate in terms of income stability, it is also possible that a piece rate is more advantageous for more skilled workers. This would particularly be the case if all artisans in the enterprise were producing the same good, and we say the skilled artisan is able to produce more products in the same amount of time than an unskilled artisan, and thereby they'd be earning more money.
So while it may not be a surprise to learn that wages were different between skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled workers, maybe it's a surprise to learn that even in the craft sector, the higher wage jobs seem to be given to men. How can this make sense? One reason is that the men who get the specialized certificates, which allow them to charge more. Another reason is that certain skills command a higher wage, and it is often a skill that traditionally associated with men and largely still monopolized by that gender.
So how payment to artisans is decided and made was another area of interest to us, and the responses were encouraging with respect to fair wages. So as you can see, 26% of replies, the artisans themselves decided the price paid to them, and giving such decision power to the artisans could have an important ripple effect, such as women's empowerment, or at the other extreme, the artisan could be underpricing her efforts. Nevertheless, 60% of survey respondents claimed to collaboratively decide the price paid to their artisans, which was generally explained to mean a negotiation between the artisan and co-op or NGO leadership, artisan enterprise management, business partners, company representatives such as production managers, input from an in-country coordinator or advisor, or a fair wage study undertaken in that country. And when deciding wages to artisan partners, the following factors are taken into account almost equally, as you can see. The minimum wage in the country of operation, fair trade requirements, fluctuations in the price of raw materials, a competitive wage landscape, economic equity across the country of operation, and a combination of other factors including labor value, artisans' request or work experience, transportation costs, community needs, basic market basket, salaries of other local professionals, and businesses' profit margins. So we found out that 2/3 of respondents say they utilize additional resources to calculate wages, which they identify to be, so they identify these additional resources to be wage calculators such as the Good World Solutions Fair Trade Wage Calculator, the cost of living in the country of operation, environmental indicators, economic indicators such as inflation and exchange rate fluctuations, value-based pricing models, and the demand for the finished product. So these last two resources that I just mentioned imply a more traditional business model in which the artisan wages are determined by the final product price. And the opposite could be labeled a fair trade model in which the artisan wages are a factor of the final price. And when it comes to making the payment to artisans, 39% of enterprises do so via a bank transfer, whether that be to the cooperative's account or to individual artisans' accounts. And we found that requiring individual bank accounts is widely accepted as a very progressive model. Also interesting is that 1/4 of respondents paying cash directly to the artisan enterprise. Another finding is that 2/3 of respondents pay their artisans directly, and the rest pay them through a middle person, who could be the artisan cooperative, the NGO or nonprofit that works directly with the artisan contractors, a co-op representative or head artisan, or a commercial agent. And as transparency and accountability are one of the World Fair Trade Organization's 10 principles of fair trade, we found it particularly interesting to see if any enterprises had mechanisms in place to ensure that their artisans receive full payment. In fact, 85% of survey respondents say that they do. The most frequently mentioned mechanism was the direct payment of artisans via a bank transfer directly to their account or by physically handing over the cash or the check. And many respondents insisted that their artisans would never be paid less than had been specified because that person who responded to the survey was the one who physically handed over the cash or the check to the artisan. And also others maintained that payment in full and on time was a major priority for their enterprise. And other mechanisms that were cited include customer and artisan feedback and follow-up, paper and digital records of transactions, annual audits of and site visits to co-ops, having the co-op representative be accompanied by other members when receiving the payment, and oversight by a local coordinator or a trusted NGO. And so we believe it's safe to assume that the artisans producing for the 15% of respondents who have no mechanisms in place are not in fact receiving full payment, because we saw people responded that some of the enterprises who do have mechanisms in place only implemented them upon discovering that their artisans were being paid less than what had been specified.
Okay. In filling out our survey, most people indicated that they do consider cost of living when deciding on how much to pay artisans, but could not or did not let us know if their workers' standard of living had changed as a result. For many, it's straightforward. Positive economic impact comes from scaling up a business. More orders equal more jobs. However, in phone interviews, we spoke a lot about impact on the artisan sector. This is a difficult thing to measure, as many groups don't have the money or the know-how to conduct these studies. But many organizations, by being on the ground, were able to recognize economic impact. They weren't big and obvious changes, like owning a car or like a large home. They were more subtle or smaller changes, which can actually represent a very profound improvement of their lives. These changes can be physical or emotional. Many spoke of empowerment, women coming out of their shells, and increased confidence. People spoke about better access to health care and ability to buy healthier foods, new roofs, and new bicycles. Here's some more examples. In West Africa, a batik artist wanted to learn how to use computers in order to sell her own products. She was able to buy one by splitting the cost with her U.S. partner organization, and now she is learning to access the global market by herself. In India, many organizations are making sure that more women artisans are opening up bank accounts. This brings more financial independence. In Haiti, a company that works with artisan groups is investing in literacy training for their artisan partners. Reading opens up more opportunities. Here are some final questions that I would just like to leave you with. How might artisan enterprises work collaboratively to better measure impact? Could transparency improve the artisan sector as well as the artisan livelihoods? Do we need a new banking system for artisans? How might we create such a system?
So as you can see, we learned a lot from this survey and would like to continue with this research because of this. We obviously have a lot more questions. And so we're hoping that as we're considering doing additional surveys and interviews, we hope that you will remain open to participating in these. We really look forward to your ongoing participation because it means a lot to us. Also, for those of you who signed in on the sign-in sheet, if you haven't, please do. And if you have and you checked off that you would like to receive a copy of our academic paper, when it's finished, we will send it to you. And finally, we are very excited to consider everyone here as affiliated with the D Lab. And we look forward to sending you invitations and updates to further other events. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to welcome Tara St. James to the podium.
Hi everyone, my name is Tara St. James and I am the creative director and owner of a women's wear brand called Study New York, which you see here. I started Study 5 years ago here in New York and I produce it domestically using environmentally friendly and socially responsible materials and production methods. And so I'm coming to you today from a fashion background. So as you can see, I have a women's wear collection and I do work with artisans. For example, in these two pictures, the fabrics are hand woven by women weavers in India. And working with female artisans has always been really important to me, but also working with environmentally friendly fabrics is really important to me. So just before I introduce the project that I'm showing to you today, I wanted to give you a little bit of background. And so the picture you see on the left here is from a collection I designed last season. The sweatshirt that the model is wearing is 100% organic cotton. 100% organic cotton grown in Texas and processed in North Carolina. We produce this domestically here in New York City. And so to move on, that was the first iteration. And I'll just tell you a little bit of background. I went down to Peru to source some knitting with a factory that I work with down in Lima. And I had one of these sweatshirts with me, and I, during my trip, encountered an embroiderer, a female embroiderer who was working with the organization that I work with. And it really had never occurred to me to work with embroiderers. It's not something aesthetically that I had ever incorporated into my collection, but the direct encounter with her was really interesting. And because I had the sweatshirt with me, I came up with a design on the spot and asked the embroiderer to do something. And so during the course of the 4 days that I was there working with her, she came up with a design. And here it is. And so the birth of Conversations in Craft happened in Lima, Peru about a year ago today, a little less than a year ago. And so this is the original sweatshirt that I came back with. And I asked the embroiderer at the time to set her wage and tell me how much she wanted to be paid on an hourly basis and how much she felt was fair, and to let me know how many hours she had worked on this project. And it started a thought process in my mind that I thought was really important, was to compare and contrast the same skill, the same technique, the same process around the world. And I happened to, at the time, trying to be finding a project with an organization in Afghanistan and Pakistan called Zardozi, who I met here at the Artisan Resource section of the New York Now gift show, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Because embroidery had never been part of my ethos or my aesthetic, I had never really found a way to work with them until this project. And so this was the original sweatshirt. Like I mentioned, we made them all here. So that allowed me to really keep the baseline of the project very consistent rather than trying to make the sweatshirts in 3 different countries. And so we made a limited run. 16 of them were created. I paid one of my interns $10 a piece to sew the sweatshirts. That's her. she's here. Feel free to ask her how she felt about that after. We packed up the sweatshirts and then prepared the embroidery pattern. So we prepared the pattern in full size to make it really simple for all the artisans who may or may not have had English language reading skills. We prepared the yarn and the trim so that all the materials were supplied by us. And we prepared details about the project. So one of the key important facets was to be completely transparent about the wages in all the countries and the project itself. And we set a budget of $24 to embroider each sweatshirt. I don't know where I got the number 24. It just kind of came to me at some point. And so people have asked me ever since I started this project. I'll be honest with you, I have no idea. I think I just like the number. I thought it would give me a good amount of craft to work with, and it wasn't going to be something minute. And as you can see on the sweatshirts that I have to the left of the screen, it did. And so the $24 was fixed price for each sweatshirt. These were the packages that we sent out, so everyone got the same amount of yarn, same amount of materials, as well as the sweatshirts. And then we sent them out to Peru, Pakistan, and Queens. So you'll probably hear me say Afghanistan and Pakistan interchangeably. I'll explain why in a little bit. And so what we sent out as far as instructions to all of the workers was how much time will you work for $24? And we really wanted the artisans to set their own wage. And this was really interesting to me because in the past I've paid fixed prices for artisan crafts, and I really wanted to compare the hourly wage, especially because here in America the conversation is so strong around minimum wage and hourly wage, and that's really what we're most familiar with. So I asked the artisans to document the process. I was lucky enough in all three instances to be working through intermediaries who were able to document the process for me, and that made it a little bit easier. And I'll explain the intermediaries as well. And then we asked the artisans to embroider the design to the best of their ability. I happen to know that they all had very strong abilities going into this. And then to work for the chosen number of hours and stop working once they reach that $24 or fixed number of hours. And so now I'd like to introduce you to all of the artisans. This is Vida from Queens, and I'll allow you to read a little bit about each of them. But I found Vida from Queens through a new organization called Bedford, who are also here today, who are working to connect artisans with designers and to make the job a little bit easier for all of us. And that's artisans within the United States, but also eventually worldwide. And so I was fortunate to find Vida, who did a phenomenal job, and her sweatshirt is the one on the left. And please feel free to come up and have a look at them afterwards. And then unfortunately the video is not working here, but I have posted these on my blog, so you'll get to see them. And I think what's really important is to see the similarities between all of the work and hear the artisans talking about their process, which is really meaningful for me. So this is Jessica from Lima. Unfortunately, her sweatshirt, while was finished, is still stuck in customs, so it didn't make it here today, but I do have pictures of it. Yeah, it's the tragedy of our reality. And so Jessica is the embroiderer that I originally met a year ago through an organization called Innovative Knitwear, who are a women-owned, and I won't call them a cooperative because they are a company, and they do all of my sweater production in Lima. So all of the knitwear that I have in my collection, I do through Innovative Knitwear, but they happen to have a group of artisans that they work with who are all women, and who they bring on to do any surface treatments such as embroidery and beading. And so this is Jessica. And then Jessica had a comment for me afterwards. She said she was a little disappointed to not be able to finish the entire design, even though she did really enjoy the project and was unfortunately not able to finish the entire design. She got very, very close to it, and you'll see in the picture in the end. And then lastly, Aneesa from Pakistan. So this is why I'm interchanging Pakistan and Afghanistan. So Aneesa is originally from Afghanistan, and I met her through Zardozi, who I met at Artisan Resource. And I never met her in person, unfortunately, but was able to connect through her. And so she is originally from Afghanistan and was displaced due to the war, and so is now working in Pakistan and living in Peshawar. So I will use the two terms interchangeably because she does identify as an Afghan citizen, but is currently living and working in Pakistan. where Zardozi happens to be located as well. And so her sweatshirt is the one on the right, and I please urge you to come up and have a look at the differences between them, but also the similarities, which I find to be beautiful. And so then here are the fixed wages from each of the artisans. So Vida worked for 2.5 hours here in New York City, and then we have the breakdown of what that equals per hour, as well as the minimum wage in each of the places. So you'll bear with me that the minimum wage in each of the countries is a rough estimate in some places, because they are quite difficult to calculate. One of the other obstacles that we came across, well, that didn't apply to New York, was that in a lot of countries the minimum wage is actually set to a monthly wage, and then the monthly hours that are being worked are not the same as here. So calculating them, we had to actually do research into how many hours a month each artisan was required to work, and it, believe me, is a lot more than the 40-hour work week that we work in the United States. So for $24 in Lima, Jessica worked for 15 hours. Originally, she had asked to work for 17 hours, but we reduced that because she had to travel several hours on the bus from the outskirts of Lima to the center to do the work. She was working in the office where my knitwear facility is, and so we added the travel cost to the, or we deducted it from the $24, and so it came out of the way or the hours, because we didn't want to have her have to cover the travel separately. And so that equals $1.60 per hour. Minimum wage in Peru is 99 cents. And then in Peshawar for $24, Aneesa worked for 17 hours. You can see. And then this is my transparency for costing. And one of the reasons I wanted to fix the price was because at the end of the day, to me, the sweatshirts are all equal in value. And so I didn't want to have different prices and pay different prices for the same work. What I wanted to do was pay the same value of work and have different results at the end. And so that was why we had a physical iteration of the sweatshirts. And I want to be able to present them all three together, and hopefully down the line, more than three, have other countries involved as well, and continue to repeat that. And so it begs the question, how much would you pay for these sweatshirts? Unfortunately, it's hard to see, but those are all three compared. And you can see the far one on the left is the one from New York, Lima in the center, and then that's the original picture of Lima from the center, and then Afghanistan, Pakistan on the far right. So for more I have all of this information up on my blog, which you can see here. And the videos as well will be there, and I'll be posting this project in addition to it as a continued. So this is a continued project that I hope to continue doing forever and ever. I haven't decided if I want to sell the sweatshirts myself on the website or to stores. I would like to sell them through my retail outlets. However, I would insist that they take all three at the same time. So that's going to be an obstacle that I have to come across next season. Yeah. Anyone have any questions?
What did you learn from this? Because you're just presenting it in a purely factual way, and I'm wondering what your own conclusions were.
Well, I was actually struck by the similarities in the conversation that we had through, and so I did have intermediaries in all three cases, but very close direct link to the artisans in each case. And so there were a lot of similarities. In particular, what I found, and I'm not sure this necessarily applies to the New York example, maybe Alex can speak to that, but in both Lima and in Pakistan, and the reason I wanted to work with women was, well, I mean, it was just important to me as a woman to work with women artisans, but also because I felt that there was a relationship there. I learned that the women really felt a connection to this craft, and were doing it because it had been passed down to them from their mothers, and that was the case with Vida here in New York as well. And they weren't able to make a living yet doing it, so a lot of cases they had to take other jobs, for example, cleaning people's homes, but really the embroidery or the craftsmanship was what they wanted to do. And so if I can play a part in that, I'd be thrilled to be able to do that.
Hi, hello. It's a really interesting project, so thank you for sharing it. I was wondering if, and you might have mentioned this, but if you could go into it, if you told all of the women about the project and what you were trying to achieve, and also if there was any level of sort of competition between them, or a feeling of competition, and sort of how you negotiated through that, because obviously that wasn't the point, but
Yeah.
I wonder if that's something that might have been felt.
Yeah, so it was really important to be very transparent with the artisans about the project itself and explain why we had fixed a price. And then they knew that there were going to be other countries also participating. What we haven't done yet is share the images of the other sweatshirts from the other countries, mostly because some of them are still on the plane. But that is part of the process, absolutely. And I think I can't speak to all three of them, but there was some competition, definitely, as you could see from Lima, with Jessica, who wanted to complete the project and just couldn't do it in the 15 hours. So yes, I think so. The next step is really to get impressions of their reactions to the other sweatshirts, let's say their competitors or their co-creators. But I'm treading that part lightly. For fear of possibly offending anyone. So before doing that, I want to really take a step back and evaluate.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah.
So I'm Kate, and you know that I like to connect people. So can you please introduce Bedford?
Oh, yes, of course. Do you want to come up, Alex? Sure. So this is Alex from Bedford, who I've known for a little while. And so Alex is responsible for connecting me to Vida in Queens. Do you want to say anything?
Hello. So this organization is trying to, there's a very fragmented maker community here and abroad. And our goal is to try to find a way to bring this together. You know, ultimately via the internet. Right now it's just us like kind of walking the pavement or, you know, scouring various, like Craigslist or that kind of thing. So in this particular case, we were connected with an organization in Queens of women who are from Bangladesh, working from home, who came together to try to find a way to turn their craft, which is embroidery, into something they could earn money from. And so we went out there to Kew Gardens on like a very rainy day, and had a meal at this amazing Bangladeshi restaurant. And we all sat there and just, we brought your stuff and she'd given us the materials and everything. And we just explained what the project was. And I think they were all a bit confused initially. And then it was like, no, you actually have to stop. Do not finish. You know, we don't want you to finish if you can't finish. So then the next stage was Caroline, who's I think filming me right now, who then went out and while Vida was doing the, there's actually something that was interesting is there was a bit of competition in the process of like who got to actually do the embroidery just for the sample, which was an interesting experience as well. So I mean, ultimately our goal is for this to be something that where Vida would be able to find Tara on her own, where we wouldn't be in the middle, or we would at least virtually. So that's what Bedford is.
Thanks.
Yes.
I just had a question. This event is called Faircraft.
What did this tell you about fairness?
Oh, how much time do we have, Kate? No, I'm getting it cut off. I'll follow up with you on the past, because that's something I want to give some thought to as well.
Essay question.
Yeah, it is. It's a thesis question, actually.
I was just curious, if you do decide to market the product,
Yeah.
how much of this story will you include in the marketing?
Oh, all of it,
All of it.
if not more.
So it'll be integral to.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is really great. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Kate, for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. It's a great group, but also what I'm going to be talking about today is a real labor of love. It's something that I've been working on with an amazing group of partners for about a year and a half. We thought it would take us 9 months, and a year and a half later, we still haven't printed the final toolkit, but I'm really happy to be able to share the story with you. So how did this start? About 4 years ago, I moved to Afghanistan, where I was working for an organization called Turquoise Mountain, which has built a school revitalizing traditional crafts in Afghanistan, and then a business development unit, which I was running. While in Afghanistan, I met, in fact, the person who hired me for this job was Hedvig Alexander, who had spent 7 years in Afghanistan working with artisans very closely. Then, after my year in Afghanistan, I moved back to New York, resumed my life here as a design strategist, teacher, and mentor. And then Hedvig moved back to Canada, where she started a company called Fire and White Collective, which is an online business selling handicrafts from developing economies. But we kept in touch, and we were talking a lot about the challenges of what we had seen, the work we've done in Afghanistan, and the idea that here in Afghanistan and in many other developing economies, you have some amazingly talented artisans making incredibly beautiful product. But how can you really connect them in an efficient way to a market? And what is the biggest challenge? We felt the biggest challenge was their inability to really understand the entire roadmap, the process that it takes from having inherited or having grown up in a beautiful craft into all the way to having it in a store in New York, in London, or Paris. So what we wanted to do is we ask ourselves, what if we could share this process with artisans and help them understand what this process looks like? Assuming, an assumption is that if they understand what the process is, then they'll be able to assess the opportunities better and make better informed decisions. So ultimately, we're hoping that the toolkit is going to promote equity and really help a whole new breed of producers to the global economy. The key issues that we knew by having spent a lot of time on the ground and working with artisans, but also after conducting a survey with 100 artisans in Afghanistan, was quality control, product development, and of course, costing and pricing. And ultimately, how do they actually get the product to the market? Our approach was very much process-oriented, both for ourselves and communicating the process, believing that understanding, that knowledge really is the key to opportunity, communicating very closely with the artisans at every step of the development, being very transparent about why we're doing it and how various organizations work, helping them and enforcing and understanding what the idea of accountability is for them as their own producers and units, equality, and ultimately trying to find a symmetry between markets here and producers in developing economies. For our own process, we felt that it was very important to have very strong partnerships on the ground, even though both of us had spent significant time in the country, to have a co-creation with the artisans, to really check with them at every decision that we made, from the font that we chose at the very end for the diary and pasture text, and from the very beginning of what are the issues and the way that they wanted to have the information communicated. But ultimately, we were also interested in creating something that showed a new model. So the book itself was, in a way, espousing and communicating the principles of innovation, inspiration, and of making connections. And it was interesting, I'll talk a little bit in the end if we have time, about this idea of making connections and how just by the co-creation process, we ended up connecting a lot of artisans on the ground. The partnerships was very important. We worked with, we're still working with many organizations that have been there for over 15 years, educational institutions, non-governmental institutions, businesses, associations, a TV and radio producer who is actually is making now part of the toolkit into animated videos for people who are not literate at all. We gave our artisans cameras at the very, very beginning of the project to document their own workshops, their houses, their lifestyles, and document how they keep accounting. On the left, on the picture on your left, it's a company that nets about $10,000 a month, and this is how they keep their accounts. They took pictures of their homes, of their work studios. We spend a lot of time talking to them with home producers and understanding their work environment. But also at the same time, we were gathering material to create really an album, if you will, that we could communicate, we can give to our illustrator. So we really wanted to make sure that since Afghanistan is a highly oral culture, we knew that creating a book would be already somewhat of a challenge. So we wanted to add illustrations and create an environment that people could identify with and really see themselves in it. So we gathered a lot of material to that end. And then we actually went to the task of doing the toolkit. We did actually toolkits because one wasn't hard enough. One for what we call level 1 artisans, which after our survey in our mind is people who are home producers, do not have a licensed business, do not have a bank account, have very limited access to computers, mostly women. This is the table of contents of what the Artisan, the level 1 book is, which is a lot more story-based. So, and it's only illustrations. While the level 2, we did a combination of illustrations and photos. For level 1, we kept it just to illustrations, just to have a language that was easier to navigate and read the key messages that we wanted to communicate. We started with something that any good business person or will tell you, that the most important part of starting a business is the people that you're working with and developing a network of trust, and try to communicate what does that network of trust mean and how it really rolls between yourself as a person who produces a craft, the producers that you might employ, your customer, and of course the people that you get your raw materials from. We try to introduce the idea of process, of bookkeeping, of organizing your work. Quality control, it's something that we've heard again and again as being a challenge for many artisans as they try to understand what is craft and what is the amount of detail and finish that is acceptable for a market in the Western world. And of course, cost and profit, which is something that I know it's very germane to the conversation today, and that we spend a lot of time trying to communicate. How do you calculate, and how do you really understand the notion of profit? And something, again, that was very important to us, also introduced the idea of making actionable plans, of reaching out for growth, and what does growth mean for the home producers and for the level 2 artisans. Product development, how do you innovate? How do you find inspiration around you? And how do you incorporate it into your products? Now, level 2 is for a lot more sophisticated audience. For us, level 2 artisans are people who are very literate. Many of them speak English, or if they don't, they do have access to someone who does speak English. They do have access to a computer. They have a bank account. They have a registered business. And many employ any from 2 to 50 people. Again, the structure actually was very similar. The concepts that we're communicating in this book, the second book, are very similar. What was very different is the way we were telling the story, and of course the level of detail and sophistication that went into each one of these chapters. Similarly to level 1, we started about the business, about this notion of trust, but very, very important was in understanding, in creating this narrative, this roadmap, is understanding who are the different consumers in the world. So who are you selling to? How do you help someone who lives in a village in Afghanistan really connect with the needs and demands and desires, and really what we would call the consumer profile of someone that shops at Barney's or at ABC Carpet. And what are people looking for? What are the criteria that a consumer in the West is looking for, and how is that different for someone shopping in Afghanistan? So trying to really introduce these terms in simple and yet ways that we know that we could communicate with our intended audience. And we had a conversation earlier, also understanding who you're selling to. What is the difference between a boutique retailer or a big discount retailer? So as you're going to then make decisions for yourself, or you're going to have an opportunity to choose who you're going to work with, have an understanding of what the differences are in that framework, in that audience. Who are resellers? We've heard again and again, artisans have a very difficult time understanding why they would pay for someone else to promote and sell their product. So we're trying to create these profiles. So as we introduce the notion of costing and pricing and where the markup is coming, you already have this understanding of who are these agents, who are these players, the cast of characters that is involved in this process. Also be very insistent on somehow communicating the idea of process, which for some artisan of any level is quite different because it's been taught differently. Often you do it at home, you start cooking and then you do part of the work, you drop it. So how do you track that work so you can understand where your failures are in quality, or how do you actually price? You know, you're talking about time earlier. Time is very different. It's when people work from home or they manage a lot of different environments at the same time. Understanding competition. So we have many artisans making beautiful products, but trying to make them understand that they are competing with a lot of other really beautiful products. So that your price, somehow expanding that universe and giving them insight into a larger environment of a competitive, what we would call the competitive landscape. We spent maybe a couple of months trying to figure out and how to communicate markup, and we had many conversations on what kind of markup, how do we have this conversation, because as a business person you can calculate markup in a few different ways. So we went back and forth with our artisans trying to understand what was the model that A, they employ most often, and B, we would be able to actually communicate without making things too complicated. And trying to then to take these notions of the resellers, of the outlets, of the export market markup, and then really draw for them the picture of what happens when you start from your own, cost and profit, and then you add up one agent, a second agent, and then of course import duties, export duties. So to really give some insight into why, when you sold something for $20, then why did your cousin sell it in New York for $120? So you overcome some mistrust or distrust of the process. So again, how do you open it up to create understanding? So pricing was a really difficult chapter for us, and both visually and in terms of communicate. How do you give insight? You really understand the process, and then be able to apply it for their own calculations. We had chapters on inspiration and innovation. Again, how do you take something that's traditional and you innovate, something that you've been doing pretty much the same way for hundreds of years, because that's really what you celebrate, and that's what we as consumers also really appreciate. But at the same time, how do you can create this new desire for the new and something that is appropriate and appropriated into a new environment? So we had a big team of the core team is the 4 people on the top, an amazing design consultant. The book has been translated in Dari and Pashto, so we had the formidable task of also thinking, what is the layout that then we can take Arab text that goes from right to left, images, tables, how can we just do that as seamless and as smooth as possible? So we had a great consultant, he's a book designer and artist based in California, an incredible illustrator. When I was in Afghanistan, I had multiple people tell me, oh wow, where did you find such an amazing Afghan illustrator? Well, she lives in Hoboken. But she had a lot of access to images and examples, and really captured what it means to be in that environment. For us, it was very important to create something that any Afghan would open, it would look theirs, that they could identify themselves in that process, for 2 reasons. 1, because it is for them, and B, for us to gain credibility. You cannot really talk about concepts and pretend that you know what you're talking about when they really say, look, the hair is all wrong, the outfit is wrong, the colors don't work, because then you're just not going to be engaged in that process. So thank you very much. We are, as I said, very excited about this project. We're going to be printing next week in Afghanistan in English, Dari, and Pashto. We're going to have a website, artisantoolkit.af. where we're going to have all the material available by chapter, full download in all 3 languages, as well a lot of the supporting material that we've developed for pricing. We're going to have Excel sheets and templates for calculating profit, costing, export papers that you need, how to fill them. So it's a really thorough piece of work, and we are very proud, and at the same time we couldn't have done any of it with an extensive group of people who've supported us along the way. Thank you. Do you have any time for questions?
Yeah, we have a couple minutes for questions.
I have a question. Can you talk about what the next steps are and what the next phase of is?
Absolutely. So we're printing the book next week, and Hedvig and Catherine Holland, who is an incredible trainer. She's been working with artisans in Africa and other parts of the world for the better part of 20 years. They're going back to Afghanistan with the actual books to run trainings, what we call train the trainers, both for level 1 and level 2 artisans. So level 1, Zardozi actually is one of our key partners. They'll be using it for their training with women. Turquoise Mountain and the American University in Kabul will be using it as their training material for the more advanced artisans. We also have, as I mentioned, the level 1 toolkit will have a CD, so where part of the chapters you could also read. Our assumption was that some women will not be able to read. However, the assumption we made also was for a woman to really succeed in this area, she has to at least have the motivation to bring a neighbor, a friend, her daughter, and say, can you sit down with me and read it? So there is this connection, but there will still be a CD with some of the audio, and then the videos, the DVDs, which will be shown in trainings, and then also online.
It seems like it would be so useful for people not just in Afghanistan. Are you open to others using it elsewhere?
Absolutely. And in the beginning, we were really hoping that will happen. Now we just need to step back. We know that's really important to be in the country and to have that close connection, and that's why we felt very comfortable undertaking this task and not be helicopter designers, or parachutists. But the core is really applicable. What you would change is the illustrations and, of course, the pricing. That was a very difficult decision when we were having case studies. We really were wondering, shall we use real prices? And of course, in Afghanistan, where there's very little transparency on pricing when people get paid, was very, very tricky. And we decided to actually use real prices because it becomes so difficult to then follow through examples. So the core material it's available to be translated, if you will, with some tweaks to different cultures. And that we would be thrilled for something like that to happen, given the amount of work that has gone into it.
I have a question: will the training and material be in local language as well?
Absolutely. The material is the whole toolkit is translated in Pashto and Dari, which is the 2 local languages. And we've been to Afghanistan 3 times, 1 to gather information and then twice to test. And we had multiple workshops, but they were all facilitated by translators. Great. Thank you so much.